Polish southern Ukraine, with strongholds of Khotin and Kamianets-Podilsky and the territory of Podolia ceding to Ottoman control in 1676.98. This period of renewed assertiveness came to a calamitous end in 1683 when Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha led a huge army to attempt a second Ottoman siege of Vienna in the Great Turkish War of 1683. 1699, the final assault being fatally delayed, the Ottoman forces were swept away by allied Habsburg German and Polish forces spearheaded by the Polish King John III Sobieski at the Battle of Vienna. Valiance of the Holy League pressed home the advantage of the defeat at Vienna, culminating in the Treaty of Karlowitz, the 26th of January, 1699, which ended the Great Turkish War. 99. The Ottomans surrendered control. The Second Siege of Vienna in 1683 by Franz Geffels, 1624-1694, of significant territories, many permanently. 100. Mustafa II, 1695-1703, led the counter-attack of 1695-1696 against the Habsburgs in Hungary, but was undone at the disastrous defeat at Zanta, in modern Serbia, the 11th of September 1697. 101. Military defeats. Aside from the loss of the Banat and the temporary loss of Belgrade, 1717-1739, the Ottoman border on the Danube and Save remained stable during the 18th century. Russian expansion, however, presented a large and growing threat. 102. Accordingly, King Charles XII of Sweden was welcomed as an ally in the Ottoman Empire following his defeat by the Russians at the Battle of Poltava of 1709 in central Ukraine, part of the Great Northern War of 1700-1721. 102. Charles XII persuaded the Ottoman Sultan Ahmed II to declare war on Russia, which resulted in an Ottoman victory in the Pruth River campaign of 1710-1711 in Moldavia. 103. Austrian troops led by Prince Eugene of Savoy captured Belgrade in 1717. Austrian control in Serbia lasted until the Turkish victory in the Austro-Russian-Turkish War, 1735-1739. With the 1739 Treaty of Belgrade, the Ottoman Empire regained northern Bosnia, Habsburg Serbia, including Belgrade, Oltenia and the southern parts of the Banat of Temeswar. After the Austro-Turkish War, the Treaty of Pasarowitz confirmed the loss of the Banat, Serbia, and Little Wallachia, Oltenia, to Austria. The treaty also revealed that the Ottoman Empire was on the defensive and unlikely to present any further aggression in Europe. 104. The Austro-Russian-Turkish War, 1735-1739, which was ended by the Treaty of Belgrade in 1739, resulted in the Ottoman recovery of northern Bosnia, Habsburg Serbia, including Belgrade, Oltenia and the southern parts of the Banat of Temeswar, but the empire lost the port of Azov, north of the Crimean Peninsula, to the Russians. After this treaty, the Ottoman Empire was able to enjoy a generation of peace, as Austria and Russia were forced to deal with the rise of Prussia. 105. Educational and technological reforms came about, including the establishment of higher education institutions such as the Istanbul Technical University. 106. In 1734 an artillery school was established to impart Western-style artillery methods, but the Islamic clergy successfully objected under the grounds of theodicy. 107. In 1754 the artillery school was reopened on a semi-secret basis. 107. In 1726, Ibrahim Mutfarika convinced the Grand Vizier of Sioli Damat Ibrahim Pasha, the Grand Mufti, and the clergy on the efficiency of the printing press, and Mutfarika was later granted by Sultan Ahmed III permission to publish non-religious books, despite opposition from some calligraphers and religious leaders. 108. Mutfarika's press published its first book in 1729 and, by 1743, issued 17 works in 23 volumes, each having between 500 and 1,000 copies. 108. 109. In North Africa, Spain conquered Iran from the autonomous Delik of Algiers. The Bey of Iran received an army from Algiers, but it failed to recapture Iran. The siege caused the deaths of 1,500 Spaniards, and even more Algerians. The Spanish also massacred many Muslim soldiers. 110. In 1792, Spain abandoned Iran, selling it to the Delik of Algiers. In 1768, Russian-backed Ukrainian haymakers, pursuing Polish Confederates, entered Balta, an Ottoman-controlled town on the border of Bessarabia in Ukraine, massacred its citizens, and burned the town to the ground. This action provoked the Ottoman Empire into the Russo-Turkish War of 1768-1774. The treaty. Ottoman troops attempting to halt the advancing Russians during the siege of Akakov in 1788 of Kachuk-Kainaka of 1774 ended the war and provided freedom of worship for the Christian citizens of the Ottoman-controlled provinces of Wallachia and Moldavia. 111. By the late 18th century, after a number of defeats in the wars with Russia, some people in the Ottoman Empire began to conclude that the reforms of Peter the Great had given the Russians an edge, and the Ottomans would have to keep up with Western technology in order to avoid further defeats. 107. Selim III receiving dignitaries during an audience at the gate of Felicity Topkapı Palace. Painting by Constantine Karpdal. Selim III, 1789-1807, made the first major attempts to modernize their army, but his reforms were hampered by the religious leadership and the Janissary Corps. Jealous of their privileges and firmly opposed to change, the Janissary revolted. Selim's efforts cost him his throne and his life, but were resolved in spectacular and bloody fashion by his successor, the dynamic Mahmud II, who eliminated Janissary Corps in 1826. The siege of the Acropolis in 1826-1827 during the Greek War of Independence of Serbian Revolution, 1804-1815, marked the beginning of an era of national awakening in the Balkans during the Eastern Question. In 1811, the fundamentalist Wahhabis of Arabia, led by the Al-Saud family, revolted against the Ottomans. Unable to defeat Wahhabi rebels, the Sublime Porte had Muhammad Ali Pasha of Karbala, the Vali, governor of the Yali of Egypt, tasked with retaking Arabia, which ended with the destruction of the Emirate of Diri in 1818. The suzerainty of Serbia as a hereditary monarchy under its own dynasty was acknowledged de jure in 1830. 112, 113. In 1821, the Greeks declared war on the Sultan. A rebellion that originated in Moldavia as a diversion was followed by the main revolution in the Peloponnese, which, along with the northern part of the Gulf of Corinth, became the first parts of the Ottoman Empire to achieve independence, in 1829. In 1830, the French invaded the Delik of Algiers. The campaign that took 21 days, resulted in over 5,000 Algerian military casualties, 114, and about 2,600 Francos. 114, 115. Before the French invasion, the total population of Algeria was most likely between 3 million and 5,000,000. 116. By 1873, the population of Algeria, excluding several 100,000 newly arrived French settlers, decreased to a drastic 2,172,000.117 in 1831. Muhammad Ali of Egypt revolted against Sultan Mahmud II due to the latter's refusal to grant him the governorships of Greater Syria and Crete, which the Sultan had promised him in exchange for sending military assistance to put down the Greek revolt, 1821-1829. They ultimately ended with the formal independence of Greece in 1830. It was a costly enterprise for Muhammad Ali, who had lost his fleet at the Battle of Navarino in 1827. Thus began the First Egyptian-Ottoman War, 1831-1833, during which the French-trained army of Muhammad Ali, under the command of his son Ibrahim Pasha, defeated the Ottoman army as it marched into Anatolia, reaching the city of Kütahya within 320 km, 200 mi, of the capital, Constantinople. 11895. In desperation, Sultan Mahmud II appealed to the Empire's traditional arch-rival Russia for help, asking Emperor Nicholas I to send an expeditionary force to assist him. 11896. In return for signing the Treaty of Hunker-Skelessi, the Russians sent the expeditionary force which deterred Ibrahim Pasha from marching any further towards Constantinople. 11896. Under the terms of the Convention of Kütahya, signed on the 5th of May 1833, Muhammad Ali agreed to abandon his campaign against the Sultan, in exchange for which he was made the Vali, governor, of the Vilayets provinces of Crete, Aleppo, Tripoli, Damascus and Sidon, the latter four comprising modern Syria and Lebanon, and given the right to collect taxes in Adana. 11896. Had it not been for the Russian intervention, Sultan Mahmud II could have faced the risk of being overthrown and Muhammad Ali could have even become the new Sultan. These events marked the beginning of the recurring pattern where the Sublime Porte needed the help of foreign powers to protect itself. 11895-96. In 1839, the Sublime Porte attempted to take back what it lost to the de facto autonomous, but de jure still Ottoman Yali of Egypt, but its forces were initially defeated, which led to the Oriental Crisis of 1840. Muhammad Ali had close relations with France, and the prospect of him becoming the Sultan of Egypt was widely viewed as putting the entire Levant into the French sphere of influence. 11896. As the Sublime Porte had proved itself incapable of defeating Muhammad Ali. 119-120. The British Empire and Austrian Empire provided military assistance, and the Second Egyptian-Ottoman War, 1839-1841, ended with Ottoman victory and the restoration of Ottoman suzerainty over Egypt, Yali and the Levant. 11896. By the mid-19th century, the Ottoman Empire was called the sick man of Europe. Three suzerain states, the Principality of Serbia, Wallachia and Moldavia, moved towards de jure independence during the 1860s and 1870s. Decline and modernization, 1828-1908. Opening ceremony of the First Ottoman Parliament at the Dolmabahce Palace in 1876. The first constitutional era lasted only 2 years until 1878. The Ottoman Constitution and Parliament were arrested 30 years later with the Young Turk Revolution in 1908. During the Tanzimat period, 1839-1876, the government's series of constitutional reforms led to a fairly modern conscripted army banking system reforms, the decriminalization of homosexuality, their placement of religious law with secular law, 121, and guilds with modern factories. The Ottoman Ministry of Post was established in Istanbul in 1840. American inventor Samuel Morse received an Ottoman patent for the telegraph in 1847, issued by Sultan Abdülmecid, who personally tested the invention. 122. Their formist period peaked with the constitution, called the Kanun-Usasi. The empire's first constitutional era was short-lived. The parliament survived for only 2 years before the Sultan suspended it. Ottoman troops storming Fort Shevkatil during the Crimean War of 1853-1856. The empire's Christian population, owing to their higher educational levels, started to pull ahead of the Muslim majority, leading to much resentment. 123. In 1861, there were 571 primary and 94 secondary schools for Ottoman Christians, with 140,000 pupils in total, a figure that vastly exceeded the number of Muslim children in school at the time, who were further hindered by the amount of time spent learning Arabic and Islamic theology. 123. Author Norman Stone suggests that the Arabic alphabet, in which Turkish was written until 1928, was ill-suited to reflect the sounds of Turkish, which is a Turkic as opposed to Semitic language, which imposed further difficulty on Turkish children. 123. In turn, Christians' higher educational levels allowed them to play a larger role in the economy, with the rise in prominence of groups such as Sursak family. Indicative of this. 124, 123. In 1911, of the 654 wholesale companies in Istanbul, 528 were owned by ethnic Greeks. 123. In many cases, Christians and Jews gained protection from European consuls and citizenship, meaning they were protected from Ottoman law and not subject to the same economic regulations as their Muslim counterparts. 125. The kings of Europe are in Paris. Napoleon III is at the center. Sultan Abdulaziz is second from right. Fourth, the opening of the Universal Exposition of 1867. The Crimean War, 1853-1856, was part of a long-running contest between the major European powers for influence over territories of the declining Ottoman Empire. The financial burden of the war led the Ottoman state to issue foreign loans amounting to £5 million on 4 August 1854. 126. 32, 127, 71. The war caused an exodus of the Crimean Tatars, about 200,000 of whom moved to the Ottoman Empire in continuing waves of migration. 128, 79, 108. Toward the end of the Caucasian Wars, 90% of the Circassians were ethnically cleansed, 129, and exiled from their homelands in the Caucasus, fleeing to the Ottoman Empire, 130, resulting in the settlement of 500,000 to 700,000 Circassians in Turkey. 131, 132, 133. Some Circassian organizations give much higher numbers, totaling 1.5 million deported or killed. Crimean Tatar refugees in the late 19th century played an especially notable role in seeking to modernize Ottoman education and in first promoting both pan-Turkism and a sense of Turkish nationalism. 134. The Ottoman Empire in 1875 under Sultan Abdulaziz. In this period, the Ottoman Empire spent only small amounts of public funds on education. For example, in 1860-1861 only 0.2% of total budget was invested in education. 135, 50. As the Ottoman state attempted to modernize its infrastructure and army in response to outside threats, it opened itself up to a different kind of threat, that of creditors. As the historian Eugene Rogan has written, the single greatest threat to the independence of the Middle East in the 19th century was not the armies of Europe but its banks. 136. The Ottoman state, which had begun taking on debt with the Crimean War, was forced to declare bankruptcy in 1875. 137. By 1881, the Ottoman Empire agreed to have its debt controlled by the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, a council of European men with presidency alternating between France and Britain.